On today's episode of Kitchen Nightmares, we follow Chef Ramsay into Everett, Washington, as he goes to visit a restaurant called Prohibition Grille. This episode is part of the 5th season of Kitchen Nightmares, and it perfectly captures the nightmare part. Before Chef Ramsay starts to rehabilitate this restaurant, we learn a bit about the situation, and it's not going well at all. The restaurant's owner is Rishi Brown. She is a former belly dancer, and her experience in managing a restaurant is close to zero. While she seems like a nice lady, she is totally lost in how to run a business of this size, and it shows on the meals. Her staff thinks that she is clueless, and they think she has no idea how to run this restaurant. Rishi also has a very crazy performance that she does almost every night for the guests. Basically, she and some other belly dancers arrive and dance while the people are having their meals. Most of the guests hate it, since it's awkward, and the theme of the restaurant has nothing to do with belly dancing. The staff has tried to tell Rishi multiple times that this dance routine is not working, but she just turns a blind eye to it. The main problem is that the food is not only terrible, but it's hated by the guests and staff members alike. Some of the staff members reject the food and never dare to eat there. Awkward belly dancing is the smallest issue the Prohibition Grille is having. Rishi admits right away that she has no idea what is going on in the kitchen, as she is not familiar with the culinary process at all. Still, Rishi is totally confident in her food since she has hired a chef with over 30 years of experience. This is when we are introduced to Chef Rocky, the man who runs the kitchen. Rishi is super happy with Rocky, and she thinks he is fantastic in the kitchen. The truth is the total opposite. People complain about the food at all times. None of it is fresh, and even the staff hates it. The staff also does not have nice things to say about Chef Rocky. A lot of them think he is slow, lazy, and he takes breaks way too often. Sometimes the waiters have to call him on his cell phone just to get him to leave his smoke break. All in all, the situation in this particular restaurant is dire, to say the least. When Chef Ramsay arrives at the restaurant, the first impression is not the best. The belly dancing advertisement feels out of place, and the whole vibe of the place is odd. Things do not get any better when he meets the owner, Rishi. Gordon sits down and starts to talk a bit with her, just to get a feel for the place. Straight away, he realizes that Rishi has no idea what is happening in her kitchen, and she very much feels totally lost. Still, Gordon wants to give the restaurant a chance, so he meets the staff and starts to look at the menu. Once he places his food order, Gordon is thoroughly disappointed with the quality. Right away, the hilarity begins. Gordon gets the soup of the day.
What's the soup of the day?
The soup of the day is jalapeno.
He realizes very quickly that this is a soup they serve every day, and it's not even fresh. Chef Rocky prepares it a week in advance. Chef Ramsay tastes the soup, and of course, it's horrible. It has no taste, and it's obvious that it's not fresh at all. This is where the owner, Rishi, shows just how clueless she truly is. She has no idea that the restaurant should be serving a different soup every day. She thinks it's totally normal for it to be the same soup all the time.
I didn't realize that soup of the day meant a fresh soup every day.
When Rishi goes to talk with Chef Rocky, he of course proclaims that his soup is fantastic and that Gordon is wrong. The problem is that Rishi also thinks that the food is great, while each member of her staff is telling her it's terrible. Gordon continues to eat the food, and it gets worse and worse. Nothing is fresh. It's all dry with no seasoning, and some of the food is not even cooked properly. The following meals are a salmon dish that is barely cooked with no seasoning, and greens that are just a mess. And finally, a filet mignon that looks artificial and horribly prepared. Chef Ramsay goes to confront both Rocky and Rishi. He tells Chef Rocky that the food is horrible and not fresh.
Soup of the day. Gloopy.
Chef Rocky
Underseasoned,
remains
wasn't even
unconvinced.
hot. Was
He thinks that the food is
hideous.
great and that Gordon is overreacting. Rishi then gets involved in the conversation, and she tries to defend Rocky. Chef Ramsay tells Rocky that it's obvious he does not care at all, and he is just going through the motions. Chef Ramsay also wants to know why Rishi even invited him if she thinks everything is perfect.
Why did you ask me here if your food's 10?
Then the truth finally gets revealed. The restaurant is losing almost $2,000 every week. Chef Ramsay calculates that this means the restaurant will lose $100,000 in a single year. It's obvious that everything is going wrong and that something has to change right away. The dinner starts and the restaurant is actually pretty packed. The only problem is that everything is going wrong. The guests hate the food, and they return plate after plate. Gordon oversees the entire process, and he wants to know what is wrong with every dish. Basically, the meat is horrible, and people often either get undercooked or overcooked meals. During the latter part of the dinner service, Gordon is shocked to see Rishi performing a belly dance, which unsettles the customers. Gordon makes fun of the performance, with the other staff members who also hate it. Finally, he has enough of the circus and he hides away in the freezer. The guests hold in their laughter and they think the entire thing is embarrassing. Rishi is totally oblivious to the fact that literally everyone hates her belly dancing routine. Gordon realizes that the whole thing is falling apart as more and more guests voice their complaints about the food. One of the customers tells Rishi that the gravy feels horrible.
Gravy feels like I got the bottom of the pot.
Rishi does nothing. She is lost and does not know how to act. Gordon has to take matters into his own hands, and he goes to talk with the customers. After apologizing, he takes their food and promises a better dish in the future. Gordon then goes into the kitchen to confront Chef Rocky and his helpers. It's pretty clear that Chef Rocky does not care about the food at all. He groans every time a customer returns their meal, and he thinks everything is perfect. Gordon notices that a lot of the customers are complaining about the gravy, so he tastes it himself and almost throws up.
It's sour.
He even forces Rishi to taste it, and she hates it as well. Gordon goes to see where they store the gravy. During their investigation, they discover that a pot of gravy has spoiled. Chef Rocky admits that the gravy is 1 week old, which is insane. Gordon tells the staff members to take all the gravy dishes back, as they are not safe to eat at all. He also discovers that old and stale bread is stored in the pantry and it's left there for days and days. Moreover, Gordon notices a serious health hazard as raw and cooked food are stored together in the fridge. These are some of the most basic rules in cooking, and Chef Ramsay cannot believe how this kitchen is handled. He confronts Chef Rocky, but he doesn't seem to care. Rishi tries to defend him and the food. Gordon realizes that the whole dinner is a mess, and it could create serious problems if one of the guests gets sick from the food. For that reason, he makes a difficult decision to close down the restaurant and end the dinner. The staffers take back the food, and the guests leave really unhappy, and some even get angry. Gordon talks with Rishi, who tries to convince him that the situation is not that horrible. Gordon is furious at her for allowing things to get this bad, and he thinks she is a horrible owner of the restaurant. Gordon has had enough of this, and he decides to leave for the night. The next day, the staff reveals that Rocky is the main cause of the problems at the restaurant because he often takes breaks during busy hours. Gordon wants to hear from everyone. They basically all hate Rocky, and they explain that he totally changed over the years. At first, he was giving it all and actually trying, but now he is just showing up and doing the bare minimum. Sometimes not even that. He often has to be called by phone when the guests arrive, since he is out smoking all the time. The biggest reveal happens when Rishi explains that Rocky told her it is normal for him to receive 3% of the tips from the food.
In other restaurants, and that's fair. They put the food out.
The staff tried to tell Rishi about this several times, but she did not listen at all. Gordon reveals that this is ridiculous for the chef to be taking tips from the food. It's basically stealing from the other staff and waiters. Rishi admits that she is afraid of making changes, especially when it concerns Chef Rocky. She goes on to explain that she is confused and does not know this business. For her, Chef Rocky is the safe zone, and she trusts him with everything. She is convinced that if he is gone, she will lose everything. She actually reveals that Rocky was fired, but then rehired weeks later because the kitchen fell apart without him there. Finally, Rishi admits that Rocky has been taking advantage of her and making her business suffer. Gordon confirms this. He is sure that Rocky is the problem and the main reason this business is suffering. Chef Ramsay explains that there is a solution to this problem, but it has to start with Rocky being fired and gone from the kitchen. Gordon promises Rishi that they can handle the restaurant without Rocky, and she finally accepts. Soon enough, Chef Rocky is finally fired. He even admits in the final moments that his heart is no longer in it. Gordon thinks it's crucial for Rishi to learn more about cooking, so for that reason, he gives her special lessons.
Take your spoon and just baste over to duck legs.
She doesn't even understand the basics of working in the kitchen and has a lot to learn. Still, if she wants to lead this restaurant, she has to know some things. Chef Ramsay also tasked his team with a complete overhaul of the restaurant and its decorations. They had to change a lot of it so that it's more comfortable and cozier for guests. They also changed the name a bit so it's more interesting. Now the restaurant is called Prohibition Gastropub. It was previously called Prohibition Grille. However, as Chef Ramsay noted, there was no actual grill in the restaurant. The menu finally changed, and it had interesting meals on it. They have been serving the same food for far too long, and this is a welcome change of pace. The staff even loves the new menu. Since the owner is the most important piece of a restaurant working, Gordon also had to help Rishi with her style. No longer in casual clothes, Rishi is now wearing a full business suit, and she also acts very differently. Gordon also makes her promise to never perform belly dancing again.
We will no longer be hosting belly dancers.
On the day of the official relaunch, Gordon invites bloggers and food enthusiasts to come to the restaurant and see the new menu. The new Prohibition Gastropub is now actually beloved by people, and they all enjoy their meals. After a long and hard-fought battle, Chef Ramsay leaves the restaurant. But what came next? In the weeks that followed, the restaurant's transformation proved to be highly successful, and Rishi began to run her establishment with a greater sense of control. Customer responses, however, were mixed, with both positive and negative reviews appearing on Yelp and TripAdvisor. New patrons were impressed with the food, relaxed atmosphere, and attentive staff, while the regular customers expressed a preference for the old menu and desired its return. It's worth noting that Gordon Ramsay revisited Prohibition Gastropub at the end of season 6, and while it was not perfect, Rishi and her restaurant showed progress and seemed like they might even last for a long time. Rishi was not in charge of the restaurant for much longer after that, though. In the following years, Prohibition Gastropub would undergo many changes. Rishi eventually sold the restaurant to a new owner in 2016. The new owner retained the same name and decor. That owner was Brenton Holland, and while the restaurant remained the same in many ways, he focused more on steak and whiskey. But unfortunately, the restaurant eventually closed in July of 2017. Following its closure, the location was taken over by a new restaurant called Abbott. It was run by a businessman called Abbott and his wife. They had to spend a long time renovating the place. Abbott wanted to make his new restaurant vastly different than the previous owner. He and his wife spent almost half a year changing up the place. It became a totally new restaurant with a focus on romantic dinners and a very cozy atmosphere. The previous owner made a lot of the decoration bright red and leather. This was not something that fit with the Abbotts and their new vision. After fully changing up the restaurant, they opened to glowing reviews, and it actually stayed that way for a while. Still, unfortunately, the place shut down in 2021 due to COVID-19. The owner Abbott talked about his experience closing the restaurant, and he puts all the blame on the COVID-19 pandemic. The restaurant was doing great before the pandemic, but after quarantine started, the business started to bleed money. As of 2023, the old Prohibition Grille, location in Everett, Washington, is now occupied by a new bar restaurant called the Flying Pig. As for Chef Rocky from the Prohibition Grille, he went on to open his own restaurant. It actually got a lot of good reviews and was successful for a while. It seems that when Chef Rocky tries, he can actually run a good kitchen and business. Unfortunately though, his restaurant also closed sometime around 2017. Currently, Rocky is working as a chef kitchen manager at another restaurant nearby. As for Rishi, according to her LinkedIn profile, she has been a restaurant manager at the Tula Lip Resort Casino in the Seattle area, where she's been since 2017. This whole experience proves one thing. It takes a lot to run a successful restaurant, and maybe sometimes it's best to stick with what you know. Belly dancing, for example.